Hey guys, it's Miranda. Today I am on white, and you know what that means. Today we're talking about product photography. And fun thing about today is we're actually going to be doing an interview with a good friend of mine, the guy who actually got me into doing the YouTube channel, who was like pushing me and saying, you know what, this is what you need to do. It's going to be good for you, and you'll enjoy it and have a lot of fun with it. And he wasn't wrong. My friend Patrick over at Profit Business Gurus, he's going to be joining us. He's going to talk about some product photography, what he thinks about it, what I think about it, and answer some questions that we've both been asked. And I'm super excited for the opportunity to be able to do this. So let's get started.
So Miranda, I hear you have a new studio space. How's that going?
I do, and I really like it. It's going good. Got my new lights set up, so that's really cool. Got lots of space. I like having lots of
The
space. I
whole
like having
vibe.
elbow room, which I didn't have in a camper, so it's nice.
Well, that's important, right? You need distance.
Yeah.
Like when you're taking pictures, if you don't have that distance, then you're kind of stuck to sort of the lenses you're using and the lighting that you kind of have to rely on. Like, what are your thoughts sometimes? Like, is it better to take a picture from like further away and like use like a tighter lens, or like use like a wider lens up close?
So I would always go for having like being further away, just because the compression in those lenses is just so much better. So you don't have to worry about all the warping, especially if you're doing something with like a box and you have the edges. Like if you have a wider lens, you're gonna have like the warp on the sides. So
Mm-hmm.
that's always something. But then again, it is fun to have a range of lenses because sometimes you just really want to get right next to the product for your macros, and sometimes it's just easier, depending on the size of it, to just, I mean, I still have my studio isn't huge, it's bigger than what I had before, but I bounce between probably like a 35 to a 70. So, I mean, I would like to get back up to the 200s, but I just don't have the distance to do that.
I
So
noticed that it's like when even if you're using like a prime lens, right? When you're in tight, you're in tight. And a lot of us doing this, I'm on a 24 millimeter a lot of the time, and it's just because it's wide enough where I don't have to be very far away, and then I could always just crop it later, so
yeah.
you don't see all the mess on the sides of it. But I noticed you look different. You look different on like a long lens. Like I think on a longer lens, it's really more realistic,
Yeah.
or maybe even like on a 35. Maybe that's why they do movies. That's pretty common on like a 35. Maybe I don't know. I don't know enough about it, right? You're the expert here, so it's just my assumption of what I've seen.
It definitely has to do with the compression of the lenses. So, like a lot of, like when you're doing portraiture and stuff, you do want a longer lens because then you're not getting the warp on people's faces. Um, I remember a photographer that I had worked with had explained it to me, like when they shoot Sarah Jessica Parker, she has a bigger nose. So they have to use compression lenses and be further away from her. That way it doesn't warp and make it look any bigger. So, I mean, it's kind of like you got to play with it. But faces are different than than products. So, I mean, I think you have a lot more leniency and you get away with a lot more if you're shooting a product over shooting people. So, you really kind of
You
got
think
to.
that's in her contract? I bet that's in her contract. They can only use certain kind of lenses on her, otherwise it's like a no go. You won't do it.
When I figure out my lens that works for my face, I'll make sure I put it in whatever contract I get. So, because I got the same
Yeah,
problem.
that's
I
the
got a big
thing.
nose.
You really start judging yourself when you start doing your own video editing and looking at yourself. You really find everything wrong with yourself. That's why it's like I don't know why people get so offended on YouTube. Like they get very upset when people insult them, or they hate on them or roast them or whatever. It's like, look, man, there's nothing they're gonna tell you that you already don't know, right? And it's just like, okay. And if you're not okay with it, then you kind of have to be okay with the hate a little bit because it comes. It comes. You get a lot more of that than people actually liking you and stuff. It's just natural. It's human nature. So yeah. So let's talk Amazon photography. You've been getting a reputation for yourself, a good reputation, by the way, not a bad reputation, about some of the stuff you've done for me, some of my friends, right? I know we keep you quite busy with all your different Amazon photography, and I don't know. I mean, it's different for me to deal with such a creative person because back in the day it was just basically shot on white, right? Um, did the best we could to try to understand it. But nowadays it's changing. There's like a science to it, I think. the angles that you go after. Some of the lifestyle stuff is totally, it takes so much creativity that most people just don't have. And that's really the difference. I see some people doing like having their factories take the pictures, which is it's pretty funny. I mean, let's leave the factories what they're good at, and what they're not so creative. Let's be serious. They're definitely not. So what's your secret, right? I mean, or how do you feel about it? Better yet, how do you feel about it? Because some people, they want to be known for certain things with their creative talents. How do you feel about being one of the best Amazon photographers out there?
It's flattering. I do like it. I Of course, when I started photography, I never would have thought that product photography, especially for Amazon, was ever something I would do. Um, Especially because for starting, like photographers, they don't really know that that's a thing. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize that's a job. And when I tell people I'm a photographer, they instantly think weddings, they instantly think senior photos. And I'm like, no, I do this. And they're like, mind blown. And I think for a lot of people, even photographers, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around that. Um, but it is fun, and I do like, especially when I'm working with someone like you. You're very good about letting me just be free and be creative with my ideas, and I think you don't get that from like factory photos. There's They're rigid. Like, there's something about them. They're just missing that extra little flair and that relatability that somebody that you're actually talking to and communicating with, that actually cares what emotion you're giving out through your photos, they're going to give you something better than factories are. And so I like being able to be that person who's like, we're going to add some fun to it and we're going to make it relatable. And you don't get that a lot of other places.
Hmm. Yeah, it's something. I actually did a video on it a little while ago, telling people to stop taking pictures of hot girls because there's no money in it. There's no money in it. Like, unless you're really well known, and the people you're working with, because look, there's a lot of pretty girls out there that aren't famous, that just need pictures taken. And some of these photographers just fall in love with that idea. And it takes them a very long time to make money. And then they wonder why. And it's almost like some don't want to do product photography. And I never understood that, because that's really where the money's at. That's who's going to pay you. Um, I mean, if you don't want to say, you don't have to. What do you normally charge for a set of images for Amazon? Say someone wants 10 pictures.
Generally, depending on what the demand is, I'm between about 800 to about probably 13, 1500. I mean,
Okay.
it really depends on how many images they want, and how many of those are lifestyle, how many of those are just like on white, and exactly So there's a lot of variables that go into it. If they want call outs, because I mean, a call out image is like one image on your listing, but technically it's going to be about, five images all pushed onto one space. So I mean, there's a lot of play with it, but that's normally where it runs.
Yeah, yeah, and people miss that sometimes, right? When there's a call out and there's those zoomed in images, they don't realize there's multiple images happening there. Because what a lot of people do when they do it wrong, they'll just have that main image and they'll zoom into it, and then the scaling's all wrong. And 99% of people don't notice it. They won't, but the customer notices it subconsciously when they're buying it. That's why it's important to have the right images. And I know a lot of people watching this video right now will say, "Oh my gosh, he charges $1,300 for pictures for Amazon." Well, that's what it costs to do it right. There's get it done on Fiverr. You can get a factory to do it. Um, do it yourself, right? But if people want to try to do it themselves, they better get into photography, and really want to do it. And you're not going to do that with a cheap camera. And I'm not trying to say that you need a good camera all the time, but you do need a good camera to get really good images. You can't, I've seen people try all kinds of stuff. It's like there's an investment there alone. I mean, with the cheapest good camera you're going to get into is $1,000, right?
Yeah.
And then they actually have to do it.
And a lot of people, I don't think, realize. I mean, the devil's in the details with, especially with photography. And on Amazon, there's so many listings and there's so many options that are so easy to like switch from one to the other. Um, it's the little things that you don't think about. And I did like a little experiment with myself just to see what would happen. And I took one photo, it's the same picture, and I edited them the same, so they both had the same color grade and everything. Took one into Photoshop and I added some like little extra elements into like the foreground. And They honestly, they were just little pieces that I stole off of. Well, I didn't steal; it was free stock photography that I got off the internet, and I blurred them out, real like blew them out. You couldn't even tell what they were, and I put them in the foreground. And I asked a bunch of people without telling them what the difference was, which one they were drawn to, and everyone was drawn to the one that I had manipulated in Photoshop, but nobody could tell me why. And that's one of those things that like people like myself, product photographers, we're gonna do those little like mind things to where you're drawn to it, but you can't really explain why. And I think that has to do with like just really good marketing. And I mean, when you're on a platform where all you have are images and you can't touch it or smell it or anything else, I mean, those little mental things that you're playing with your customers, it's like that's why they're gonna buy yours over somebody else's. So, and you don't get that when you're doing it yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, and there's research that goes into it too. Because when you're, say, somebody gives you a product and they're like, "Okay, Miranda, I want you to take a picture of this," you're obviously going to go on Amazon. You're obviously going to go see what everybody else is doing, and the goal is to make that main image better than everybody else's. And
Mm-hmm.
you're right. There's all kinds of little tricks. I mean, there's a trick I learned years ago of sort of how you place the main image, where you
Mm-hmm.
put it, and everybody just balances it perfectly in the center. And I gave away this trick in a video a little while back, where I position it slightly to the left, so it's always off center just a little bit. And someone might look at it and say, "Wait, this isn't perfectly centered." Well, I put it to the left because people read left to right.
Yes.
So it does something like these little tiny things. But if people don't know about these tricks, right, like they'll just never fully utilize um, the platform for what it's worth. And I mean, I could say that one listing that you did for me recently, um, we won't say what it was. They were green, remember those guys?
Yes.
Pack of 10, remember those? That was converting at 41%, I think. 41% conversion. And that's from pictures. That's from having the right images. Because if your images aren't right, then nothing's, people will never click on it. So you can never actually sell it to them. And yeah, so that makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And it I don't know, maybe you've experienced it because I know you help people build their listings and stuff. But as a photographer, I think one of the biggest struggles is people they get to the end of like they get to the end when of their building their listing, and it's like, okay, now it's time for photos, and their budget is already, shot. So they think they're just going to do it themselves. Do you feel like people doing that are actually just kind of shooting themselves in the foot?
100%. 100%, because they'll spend a lot of money on basically everything but because it's the last thing, and it shouldn't be. And the problem is it's the last thing by design. So say you're actually getting a factory to make your product, you're making a fully customized product. Well, what I tell the people I'm working with is that first sample, those first samples that come, those off tool samples, so the exact product. So the factory will send you final samples before they actually go into production. Or sometimes what they could do is say the product's in production, they can pay a little extra and get like an e-pack, so it's extremely fast air freight, maybe 3-4 day air freight, and get some samples. Those samples should go to the person that is launching the product, but they should also go to the photographer. So it gives you a little bit of time to actually have the images taken. And that's the way to do it. But then sometimes they just don't have the money, right? Because they spend all their money on product. They have a budget for marketing, so PPC and things like that, and they just don't have the money. And it's a shame because they put so much into it, right? They put so
Yeah.
much work into differentiating, and then they're never able to truly show people what it looks like. And then they say, "Well, I'll do it later." Well, it doesn't work that way in a platform like Amazon. You can't fix it later because it's all about how you launch a product, and you can't just change images later. I mean, you can make slight tweaks over time, but you can't just change images later and think it's going to be the same thing, but because it won't. It definitely won't be. The listing's tainted.
Do you think so? Like somebody who does put themselves in that kind of bind, would it be better to pay a photographer and just get your base 3 to 4 images and then add all your call outs and all that other stuff later, but at least start with like the basic, something that's, good and of quality?
Yeah, yeah, I think that would be a good middle ground. Maybe just do a couple images, get a main image done, and maybe just get some secondary images done. And then you could always revisit it later. That would be okay with revisiting because you would still have the product. Then they could come back to you later after maybe they make a little bit of money. But that's really where the value's at. Because look, when you're building an Amazon listing, key is a good title, gets them there, right? That's the whole discoverability part. But click through rate matters. And if you don't have a good click through rate, nothing works, right? So you can advertise, great, people see it, but then you won't get any click through. I mean, it's a little different scenario once they're actually in the listing and they're not converting. That's something else. But if you don't have a main image that's almost clickbait, honestly, that's how I'm looking at Amazon main images now. They have to be almost like clickbait. If you don't have a good main image, you won't know what's happening. You won't know why you're not converting. But meantime, they're spending who knows what on advertising and failing. And it's just because they cut that step out. And that's really why I really see the value of good photography. Because look, how else are you selling this to somebody, right? You're not in person. It's so difficult to do this if you don't have the right images.
Well, and a lot of people, like I said earlier, they shop with their eyes, and you have to have an image that's going to speak for you and represent you in the best way possible. And you can have the greatest product, the highest quality thing in comparison to your competitors, but if your image isn't screaming high quality, that's not what I'm going to think of when I see it. So, yeah.
Exactly. What do you what would you say to someone? Say they were coming to you to get images taken. What should they have ready for you?
Should they have ready for me? So I like to have a few things. I like to have like their general demographic, like, okay, who are you selling this to? That way I know when I'm doing the lifestyle photo exactly how I'm going to block it. If you have certain branding, as far as colors or like a certain like vibe that you're going for, that's nice too. Because if you have more of a corporate industrial feel to your brand, and I go and put you in like a hipster coffee shop, it's gonna clash and it's not gonna work. So it's nice to know, their direction and who they are as a company, so I can portray that the best way possible when I actually take the photos.
They should really know the demographic.
Yes.
Right. And I think most that know what they're doing somewhat should know that, because I mean that's really what you're doing with your research, right? So you need to understand who the customer is, and I'm sure you could try to help guide them in that direction once you get a general idea.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if they tell you it's a hipster, right? Maybe it's, I don't know, coffee or something, right? Okay, well, lifestyle images here could be in a coffee shop or something like that. But if they don't give you that, then it's a little hard for you to position your lifestyle images.
Yeah. Well, like I made the example in one of my videos about, if you had a hammer, are you targeting that hammer more to women, or are you targeting it more towards men? Because there's two very
I saw
different
that video.
ways.
It was almost sexist, by the way. I saw that. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, that's the way the game is played. So you got to know these things. And a lot of customers, or like a lot of my clients that call me and are like, hey, I want photos, they generally are like, do whatever you want with it. And while that's great to a certain extent, it's fun on the creative side to have all that free, be like, all right, this is what we're going to do. Because I think that adds that fun flair and that edge that you don't get from factory photos. But it is a little irritating when you have somebody call you up and they're like, they have no direction whatsoever as far as like how they want their stuff laid out. Especially I get products that have multiple pieces, and it's like, well, I need you to explain to me what are the like ranking. If you have 5 different parts of this product, rank it 1 to 5 most important, so I know exactly what to focus on. Because a lot of the time I go for something that's more visually pleasing than I do for actual functionality, which can, if you don't give me that direction, that can end up hurting your listing.
So yeah, I mean, I agree. People have to they have to be clear of what they actually want and what their expectation is, especially with bundles, because sometimes you can't. People don't bundle right from the beginning. Like they're putting multiple products within the same listing, and if you don't know what the main product is, I mean, you can't know, right? They're just sending you something. If you don't have that kind of explanation of what's most important, then it just doesn't work. But it's communication, and it's funny sometimes too. Is I have a conversation with somebody and we talk about it, and it's like, wait, you can't give me like that elevator pitch about your product. You can't tell me about, like, tell me what's important to you about your product. Tell me the 5 most important things about this product, because that's going to be the call outs, right? That's going to be the zoomed in pictures. And they freeze up. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, that's important. So it's almost like, well, go back to the drawing board. Hopefully you made a good product decision here to start with, but you really need to go back and look to see what your main attributes are. And it should be easy enough, because that's how they diversified the product. That's how they differentiated their product. And that's really what they need to bring to the table, I think. What it is, who's going to use it, and how's it different than everybody else's. And then you could take that and really run with it and make it unique. And I'm glad other people are giving you freedom too, because that's how I operate. I like giving you freedom. Once I trust somebody, it's like, well, it's not my job to be creative. It's that person's job to be creative. So instead of always the product owner being creative about it, I mean, they should have some input, but they should also give you a little bit of freedom so they can get something really special out of it. Because if they try to micromanage, they're only going to get their best expectation, right? It'll never go above their expectation of what they thought, because they were micromanaging the whole process. They don't give you the freedom, that you need to truly be creative with it.
Mm-hmm. And I love it when people are like, this is my creative vision of what I'd like you to do with this. But on the same note, it's like you said, they need to also be like, all right, well, this is where I think it should go. Do you have anything as a photographer that you want to add to that? And then I think those end up being the best listings that come out of it. And I don't know, because they're the most fun to do. And honestly, when you're doing photos, the emotion always comes through. I don't care who you are, the emotion comes through the photo.
What's the favorite product you ever did?
Oh, that's a good one. I've done so many. I did like a child. It was like a little kid's product, and I ended up taking that. The people that let me do it, I just got total free reign on how the photos were shot, and I think just the whole process with that was a lot of fun, because like they gave me like, this is what like the main point of this is, and this is like what we care about, but then they're like, just have fun with the rest, and they wanted as many lifestyle images as they could get. And I went everywhere. It was like it was a little safety device, so I ended up going into a bunch of these really nice kitchens. I knew people who had brand new houses in the area I was at. I was networking with some other people, so I got to go to all like these fun, really nice places and just do whatever just to make this product look as awesome as possible. And it just, the whole experience was a lot of fun. And I think that came out in the final product. I think you could totally see like, all right, this is a serious, safety thing. That's what it's supposed to do. But at the same time, it can be fun, and it's, it's still even in these high-end kitchens, it still is, it's pretty, and it's not breaking up, the aesthetics of the room like you would think it would. But yeah, it was fun.
That's the thing. When you use a good photographer, this person has relationships from other stuff that they've done in the past, so they can help with some of that, right? So they needed some lifestyle photography, and you have relationships. So whether it be maybe in a kitchen or a dining room or a living room, right? You're able to do that because you can pull strings from previous jobs you might have done. Not everybody can do that, so that's why it's good to work with somebody who's been doing it for a couple of years. I'm gonna tell you a story what I used to do back in the day before all this happened, right? So before I was really doing well with this, years ago, I used to need product photography. So that's how I got into photography to start with, because I needed it myself, and it became a hobby and all that action. But what I used to do is I used to sneak into IKEA, and it was like, for my lifestyle stuff, it was like a one-shot deal, because I knew I'd get a couple pictures off, and then I would get thrown out pretty quick. So it just truly like run and gun, as they say, right? And
Yes.
you do what you have to do, and I did it. I was one of those back then, but you do what you have to do.
I think if you're able to get a photographer, which I've done the same thing, if they're willing to take your product into somewhere where they know the shot's going to be fantastic, and they're like, I only have like a minimum amount of time and I could get kicked out for this, I think those are the best ones, because like the atmosphere and just the fact that is clearly a one-time deal, and you're not going to get that image from anybody else.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those are fun to do, and that was a lot of what the product I was talking about ended up being. and it was like, kind of tucking and rolling behind stuff, and like, okay, I hope no one sees me with this giant camera as I'm taking pictures of this, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, guys, you have to realize this wasn't like with an iPhone. This was like with like a legitimate. You look like a professional. That's what kills you. So they know what you're up to. If it was like with an iPhone, nobody would ever really say much, because you're essentially going in, placing your product somewhere where you think it looks good, and you take the picture. But if it was with an iPhone, it wouldn't be good enough. So you had to do it, and it was almost like you welcome yourself to the pain. Like you know what's gonna happen. You're gonna get embarrassed, but they can't make you delete the picture off your camera, right? So you just get thrown out and you do it with a smile, and it is what it is. And funny, it's like they never really recognize me. Like I do it all the time. I just keep going back. They'd see me do it, then they throw me out. So it was always like no hard feelings, but they knew you weren't allowed to do it. But you have to, you have to do. I mean, now it's like different, you know. I mean, we've gone to the point of renting hotel rooms. So say we needed something very specific, something modern. I mean, I live right next to New York City. We just, I mean, at one point it got a little stupid one time where we needed it for 3 days, and it was a very expensive hotel room. So it was $1,800 just for the room for 3 nights, but it was for a very premium product. I needed it, and then we snuck in other pictures for other products too at the same time. So you try to make the most of it. But it's funny how far you come sometimes, right? From sneaking into like IKEA, or you told me a story once about you sneaking into Home Depot to get, because there's kitchen setups and bathroom setups, right? So you could do stuff like that if you wanted to go look for locations. And but it's amazing how this whole game could change that quickly for you if you're successful with it. You could really elevate your game, but you don't have to do that, right? You could be creative um, and do things like that. Go to IKEA or Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever. Just be ready to take some abuse. So obviously you spend time on Amazon and looking at other people's work. Is there something you see other people doing that you're like, oh wow, that's rookie move? What's like the biggest rookie move you find?
So the biggest mistake I see people making with their Amazon photos is wasted space. So everybody is given the same amount of real estate for their little tiny thumbnail image. Even when the image is blown up, we all get 2000 by 2000 pixel square that we can showcase our product in. And a lot of people, I think the biggest mistake is they try to frame it up correctly and crop it to be the nicest crop, and like, oh, it's sitting where it needs to be in post. And so they're in Photoshop or they're in whatever editing software that they use to crop this. And they're like, okay, that looks great. And they put it on there and they don't need to. So, like, a good tip or a good like cheat that I like to use is I push that baby all the way to the edge. If I have a picture or of any product I take a picture of, when I'm fitting it into that 2000 by 2000 square, it is basically kissing the edges of every area it possibly can. So I keep it to scale. Obviously, you want to keep it to scale, but you want to get it as blown up inside that little box as possible, because if you do it right, when you have your whites, when you upload it to, if you have your whites correct, when you upload it to Amazon, it's just a seamless transition. And Amazon's platform, because it is just, it's just white, your white on white image, or your image with the white border just bleeds into the rest of their site, and it's just a seamless transition. So you actually have more space, and Amazon itself does the framing for you. And when you do it that way, your image is actually bigger than your competitors, and in doing so, you actually are like, your product photo is like literally in the face of your customer. It's like, look at me, I'm here, I'm huge. And I actually made this mistake with I shot for a client and I did one of their products, and I was looking at everybody else's, and in comparison to everybody else's stuff, it really wasn't that bad. But I was like, something's wrong, because it was a longer thing, so it like didn't really fit awkwardly into this little square without being super tiny. And the way I had blocked it, like the photo looked great, but for it being pushed down in this little thumbnail with all this white around it, it just wasn't working. So what I ended up doing is I actually went back, I reshot that particular hero image and sent that to my client. I said, why don't we, experiment? You try this instead and tell me what happens. And they put that up, and they now had the biggest display of that product. And they said that their numbers just skyrocketed from that because it was in their face and you could very clearly see what it was. And when you have something that's like this, and it's like, hey, look at me, I'm a product, to something that's like over here, like just chilling, it's obvious, and people are going to be drawn to that other one.
That's the thing. It's guys, this is why when sometimes you look up a product on Amazon and they're all like a certain size and one looks bigger, or maybe you might find a couple that look smaller. So some of it's not as obvious as others, but basically you want the product to take up as much room as possible. And I mean, it needs to be scaled right, but it should be the biggest possible footprint, because that's what Miranda's basically saying is the picture size. So it's 2,000 pixels by 2,000 pixels, and you need to use that full space, and try to fit in as much of an image as you can with minimal white. And I think where people get confused is Amazon says that you need 80% of that picture needs to have the product in it. And that's like a huge hint that's telling you try to fill up as much of the space as you can, and it makes your product look bigger. So you don't want to leave like huge margins around the sides. You want to get it as close as you can to the full image as you can, with just minimal white all the way around, so it's still centered properly and things like that. And it makes the image pop. It definitely makes the image pop. And I love to say that's the only magic to a great main image, but that's definitely a important part of it.
I think a lot of people don't realize how difficult it is to shoot on white. There's a lot of things that go into shooting on white, and while you think it's super easy and they make all these tools and stuff for you to do it, it's actually it takes some learning, it takes some time, and it's something that if you mess it up, it totally takes you way down from magazine quality. Like, just when you upload your image, you can totally tell when somebody's got the little bit of gray along the edges and it starts to frame out their little, their little box, their little thumbnail, because they didn't get their whites right. And I think that like totally pulls down the quality, and then it's like you did all that for nothing. A lot of people try to compensate by overexposing their image, so they actually blow the image out and lose a lot of details just because they're trying to get that true white and that crispness on the edges. And you can't do that because now you've lost the detail in your photo and you've jeopardized your quality in another way. So it's a very fine balance between how to get that where you don't lose quality on your actual product, but you don't mess up the whites in the background.
Yep. The whites are off, their shadows are wrong. They have shadows in there when they shouldn't. The whites are wrong, and a lot of the time, when I've noticed that, it's because they don't know what they're doing, and they end up using like the background removal tool in Photoshop, and they never get the edge perfect all the way around, and you see it. You can't zoom, you can't zoom in. And you're kind of compensating too. I've noticed that even some of the stuff you've given us, where you make that little secret tweak to it for the color sometimes, because Amazon, when you're uploading an image on Amazon, it ends up looking different than like on a Shopify, just slightly. It could be like a shade off. It maybe isn't a problem if it's like a black product, but if it's like a blue or a red or yellow or something like that, it shows. And I'm not saying someone's going to call you out for it, but it's better to have a more product, a more visually accurate product. And if you don't know about these little nuances, you'll always be wrong when you're uploading the images, because unfortunately, Amazon does what they do to the images. So the images look a little different sometimes when you upload them. That's why you see that gray sometimes in the background. They think it's right, but their whites aren't set right. And if you maybe upload it to a Shopify shop, it might look fine, but Amazon does some weird stuff to the images, and it keeps everybody honest, I think. Like, if your images aren't perfect, there's no help on Amazon. It is what it is. It's just what it looks like. But I've noticed that they desaturate sometimes.
They do, and there's like a fine balance between like little tweaks and stuff that I'll have to do. I've had to do in Lightroom and in Photoshop to just compensate for that. Also, something I don't do as much of now because I've gotten the hang of it, and this is overshooting so many products. But in dealing with this issue, but I used to go from monitors. Like I used to look at the product image on a bunch of different monitors and to see the different color, because nobody's going to be looking, like nobody's monitor settings are going to be the same as mine. So I actually look, I have two different computers and I have my phone that I go through, and sometimes I'll send it to like a friend or whatever. I'll be like, hey, what does this look like color wise? Tell me. And so I try to get it as true to that as possible. And while normally a lot of stuff, like you say for web, a lot of stuff does stay true to how you edit it. Amazon does do, like you're saying, those weird little tweaks that you have to compensate for.
That's why you need somebody who's actually good at product photography. You know, if you're like a portrait photographer, look, man, there's lots of stuff you could do to make people happy because you're just making them look as good as possible. So most of the time, like a portrait photographer, they're not necessarily taking accurate images, right? They're trying to make that person look as good as possible. But when it comes to a product photography, you're trying to make that look as accurate as possible. So it's like a little different. But the creativity comes into play where the final image is actually slightly different than it is, but then when you upload it, it's accurate. And it's knowing that difference that I'm going to say 90% the people doing this don't know how to do it. This might actually open some eyes up. Even us talking about this, they might actually realize it. But that's where you bring a lot of value, because you've been doing it for a while, so you know what you need to do. And there's less issues that way too. And really, most people won't even notice. They'll get the pictures and they'll be like, oh, well, that's what it looks like in the picture. Well, I mean, if I put a product right next to the picture, it should look identical. And if it doesn't, then it's wrong. It's that simple. That's how particular people should be. And most aren't, unfortunately.
Well, like I said earlier, I mean, I did that experiment between the two images where one was manipulated in Photoshop and the other wasn't. And it's those subtle differences. So it isn't necessarily that, I make the photo as a photographer bigger than somebody else's, or I set it off to the left a little bit more than you would. It's the combination of all of the little details, and even as far down as shooting the product, getting into it and being like, the box got a little damaged in shipping, and I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna Photoshop out all those little scratches or the little tears on the corner, and I'm gonna make sure everything is like just as flawless as it can be while keeping it as real as possible.
There you go, trained professional. All right, Miranda, well, today's been enlightening. I think my subscribers enjoy this. I hope your subscribers enjoy it as well.
Yeah, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate you letting me on your channel and just talking to you and your peeps, and hello to everybody on that side. And hopefully we get to do this again. I think it'll be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it. So, leave your questions, comments down below if you want to see another video, for me and Patrick talking about product photography. Maybe we can pick his brain on like some Amazon stuff and what to do, if you're building a listing, an area that he's more familiar with that, I know about, but I'm not necessarily comfortable. I would love to be the voice for you to talk to him, get some time. I think that'd be great for everybody, a good learning experience, and have some fun with it. So until next time, guys, you have a great day. Hit the subscribe button if you like this video. Hit the notification bell so you know when I upload the next one. And until next time, guys, you have a wonderful day. See y'all later. Peace.